You're now experiencing data with Brian O'Neill. Experiencing Data explores how product managers, analytics leaders, data scientists, and executives are looking at design and user experience as a way to make their custom enterprise data products and analytics applications more useful, usable, and valuable. And now, here's your host, the founder and principal of Designing for Analytics, Brian O'Neill.
All right, welcome back to Experiencing Data. I'm excited to have Gadi Oren on the line from LogicMonitor. How's it going, Gadi?
It's going great. Thank you for having me.
I'm happy to have you on the show to talk about, well, not just monitoring, but you've done a lot of work on SaaS analytics products in the monitoring space, software for IT departments in particular. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you're doing at LogicMonitor these days?
So too many years in different industries. I actually spanned multiple industries, starting from medical imaging, and let's say in the recent 18 years, mostly some sort of monitoring solutions. And I dabbled also a little bit with marketing data analytics. That was not a successful company, but I might draw some examples from there. Right now, I've recently joined LogicMonitor through an acquisition. I was the founder and CEO of a company called Declarative here in Boston. And that company was acquired in April by LogicMonitor, and I'm now the VP of product management. And what LogicMonitor is doing is solving a fairly old problem that still remains, which is monitoring is really difficult. Many companies, as they grow, they reach the point where they realize how important it is for them to monitor what's going on in order to be successful. And then they realize that it's such a complex domain that they need to develop expertise, and it's just all around difficult. And our mission, LogicMonitor's mission, is to provide a monitoring solution that just works, that's simple enough to just go in and install it quickly and get coverage on everything you need, so that you as a company can focus on what you really care about, which is your business.
Obviously, that's a hard problem to solve, and I'm curious for people that are listening to the show. So I imagine a lot of what this product is doing is looking for exceptions, looking for things that are out of bounds from what some semblance of normal is. Is that correct? And then providing that insight back to customers. Is that a fair evaluation?
It's a fair evaluation. There's a wider context of what is there is obviously the question of what is normal, but in general, providing that there's many ways to define what normal is, then the answer is yes. It's the ability to give you visibility into what's going on. First of all, to just see that things work in general and work okay. And then when something goes out of what you define normal, to notify you on that and help you with getting things better.
From your experience in this space, since in a lot of companies that are doing analytics, it may be difficult to define the boundaries of what normal is, such that you could do something like alerting on, we've detected abnormal trends in sales, or I don't know this. I can't think of something off the top of my head, but for companies that maybe haven't worked. I like the idea that you have that the focus of the product is on declaring a conclusion or driving an insight that's probably derived from analytics that are happening in the background. So I would put that in the camp of declarative analytics as opposed to exploratory, where it's like, here's all this data. Now you go and find out some interesting signal in it. Most customers and users don't want the latter. They want the tool to go do that job. So do you have any suggestions for how companies that maybe aren't quite in a domain where it's black and white, like a binary thing, like, this port is either connected or not. And if it's not connected, that's bad. And if it is, it's good. Is there a way to kind of approach putting guardrails on things, or what normalcy is? Or are you following what I'm saying? How do you move into that declarative space?
The answer is obviously depends. But the problem is so difficult that you are even having a hard time defining the question, right? It is very, very difficult. But by the way, you called it declarative, and I like that. I actually call it in a different way that usually creates a lively discussion, which I call it opinion system. And the reason is, there's some evolution here, especially with regards to monitoring, but I think it's the same for other type of systems that are analytic based. 10, 15 years ago, it was so difficult to just gather all the data that being non-opinionated or non-declarative for your definition was pretty good because people just needed the data and they brought the context themselves. But there's been a lot of changes since that time. First is the availability of computing, but the other is also the need is much, much greater now for give me the opinion, give me the bottom line, right? So the system needs to be opinionated, and then it can be a variety of things. It's really multiple types of algorithms that can be used here. A small set of that is what people define today as machine learning and AI, but it's actually, the domain is much larger than just AI. And it's the ability to look at multiple signals and develop in a certain degree of confidence a conclusion that is derived from those multiple signals. To put it in the most generic way that I can. Some of them can be discrete or binary, and some of them can be continuous. How do you look at all that stuff and say, I think that this is what's going on? And even more than that, here is what you think, here's what we think is going on, here's what you can do about it, or here are a few options for you to act on it. That is the ideal solution that we would like to have. And obviously, we have very, very little of that right now. I think it's a journey that will take us years to get.
I love that idea of opinionated because I think it softens the expectation around the technology, and it also reminds people that it's no different than when, your plumber comes to the house and you're like, well, the shower hot water isn't quite as hot as the sink water. And maybe he tightens some things and he turns on some faucets and he gives you an opinion about what might be wrong without actually tearing apart the whole system. And we would tend to kind of trust that. And he might say, well, what I really need to do is X. And then you make a decision whether you want to pay for that or not. But it's not kind of like, if you can't give me 100% decision, then I'm unsatisfied. We accept that opinion. And so what I've found in my career and experience with clients is that sometimes if they can't get it perfect, they're worried about doing anything at all. And so I like this idea of casting an opinion. So on that thought, then, how do you balance the, especially if you're, for example, you're putting a data model in place or something like this, which is going to learn from the information. There may be insights gleaned from some type of a computer-based analysis, which may be unseen or unexpected by the business. And that could be positive or negative. But there also might be some context of what normal or expected is from the end user. So do you have any, for example, I expect the range to be, kind of between 32 and 41 most of the time. And I know sometimes it goes up, and I kind of have this feeling, about X, Y, and Z. So they kind of have something in their head, and then you go and do all this technology and it says, well, the normal range should be 14. And so we flagged a 16 here. And he's like, oh, that's not really, I don't care about that. It's not high enough for me to care. It's how do you balance that kind of sense that maybe an end user has, I track sales or I'm doing forecasting and they have all this experience in their head.
Yeah. So a couple of things. It really depends a little bit. It depends a little bit about the domain. In some situations where the end result is what's really, really important, you can use things that are more black boxy type of things like neural networks or things like that. Usually tend to be, not always, but most cases, they tend to be very black box. It's like, here's the result. And, I can't tell you why that happened. It's based on all this training I did before. And, but in some situations, the result cannot be black box. It needs to be explained. And in those situations, you really need to give people an explanation on why things happen like they are, right? So monitoring, in many cases, tends to be the latter, which is, I want to see the signal and the signal crossed and what was the shape, and I want to see how it looked yesterday. And if it looks the same, maybe it's okay. And, in certain situations, I don't know, maybe if you have, let's say you have a database and it has a latency of 0.5 millisecond, which is very small. And then this morning it moved to 1 millisecond. Is that normal? Well, it's not normal, but I don't care about it because before it gets to 5 milliseconds, I don't need to know about it, right? So in those situations, I don't know if that's what you referred to by guardrails or things like that. We would also provide, while the system is learning and can automatically detect what's abnormal, there is a range to what I care about, right? So I'm going to put let's say a threshold and say, only if you cross 5 milliseconds and this is not normal behavior, then I want to see an alert, right? And normal could be defined like the signal is 2 sigmas away from, the same day last week, right? Something like that. There's a different level of approaches, both in terms of how transparent the data processing is and in what type of knobs you should provide for the user, to the user, in order for the user to develop the right confidence level to use that solution.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there's a balance there, and I think we actually, when we talked about our screening call, you made a comment about how I think it was it was a good quote. It was something like, "I think English is the cutting edge UI is English." If I recall, and if I can,
or any other language, yes.
Yeah, exactly, or whatever your interface is in. But I would agree with that sentiment that I think the customers, and from a user experience standpoint, deriving that conclusion first, or opinion, as you say, and then backing out from there and providing the data, or what I would call the evidence for the conclusion, is a way to not black box everything. You're providing the human with the relevant analysis and evidence that went into the conclusion, and hope if that was modeled on their behavior, then you're kind of modeling the system around what they would have done. So you're basically just replacing human work with computer work. And what I've found over time with some of these systems, with just watching customers, is they're very curious about it at the beginning. And if you can build that trust, they start to understand how to trust your opinions. They tend to not hold you responsible as much if an opinion is wrong, because they know what went into what went into the math, into the analytics, and also what didn't go into it, such that they can kind of fill the holes in themselves. So, but of course, this means you have to know your customer. You need to have some kind of interaction with them. So can you tell me about like some of your customer interactions? Like, how do you'd mentioned one of your KPIs for your team. Tell us about one of your KPIs for your team.
Over the years, obviously you develop professionally, and you change the way you approach to what you do, right? So I've been doing different ways of product management. Even, I was a CTO at some point, but in kind of my basic attitude is doing product management and building the product from that sort of understanding of what it is we want to build. And what I've realized over the years, that there is a couple of really important points. One is, the more you talk to customers, the more you understand the problem you're trying to work on. It's especially important as you kind of couple of years into working on a certain problem, you get to a point where you're so familiar with it that you can pretty much, without talking to customers, generate a lot of really good product for some time. And the problem is that this might diverge at some point, or you're going to miss something important. I think that talking to customers all the time is what grounds you to what's going on. And so I've made my team of about 10 people, we are monitoring how many times they have interaction with customers doing, I'm going to chart it monthly. I started recently as one of the KPIs, and I'm going to just check if certain part of the team is talking less to customers, then why is that okay or not? And then if you have a spike, somebody stops talking to customers, then, we're going to have a discussion on why that happened. Because I think ultimately it's going to take you away from understanding what's going on, and you'll be operating on interpolating from information instead of listening to the customer.
Is it safe to say your team is comprised of primarily other product managers on certain like portions of the product, and then you have some design, user experience reporting into you?
I have let's say about 10 people. We're hiring now all the time. The company is growing very quickly, so let's say around 10 people, and most of them are product managers, and some are design people. We also have a variety of previous experience in the team, which is really something I like. And some of them are from the industry, and they have built-in knowledge. Some were in engineering before, which I think has also an interesting experience. And one or two came from being sales engineers or sales has a different aspect of benefit to it. What I don't think I have. One is someone that was a customer before, and if you can have that, that's really advantageous. I might be able to do that at some point.
Sure. No, I think that's great. Do you involve your engineers or your technical people, data scientists, whatever, involved with any of these interviews that you do in your customer outreach?
As much as possible. We will locate on multiple sites, and a lot of the engineers I work with right now are located in China, and they may or may not be, in terms of language, we might have sometimes barriers, but absolutely when possible. I know that when I transitioned from engineering to product management, the exposure to customers was very, very educational for me. And so, whenever I'm able to expose people to customers, that, I take that opportunity. Sure.
You have an interesting position, and maybe this is super common, I don't know. But you've started out in a technical capacity, you have an engineering background, you were a CTO, and now you're in product. So I'm curious, as someone that's looking at holistic product, both a business and also some kind of experience that you need to facilitate in order to have a relevant business, are there biases that you need to keep in check from your technical background where, the the engineer in you says, I want to do X, and you're like, no. Like, what are some of those things to watch out for to make sure that you're focused on that customer experience and not how it's implemented?
The question of bias is a wide one. It's not just about engineering. It's bias in general. At some point, you obviously you get excited about what you're building, and you see all the possibilities. We can do something really cool here. We can solve that problem or this problem, and then you start developing a preference. It's very natural. And so when you realize that this is the case, sometimes you try to just not have a bias, but you can't. Everybody has one. The problem is, how do you make sure that this bias does not impact when you talk to a customer? Because it's very easy to have a customer tell you what you want to hear. The probably the easiest person to deceive is you if you don't pay attention, right? And so this is one of those things. And with regards to engineering bias, it's not very different than any other type of bias. So engineers in many cases just really care about working on interesting things and new technologies. And sometimes there's a problem. I think the more advanced engineers start to think about, how would I generalize that problem? And then it might be a runaway process where they want to build more than required. And that more may or may not be pointing at the right direction. So that's another type of bias. So that, again, definitely something to watch for.
I want to move on to some other topics only because I can totally spend an hour talking about how important it is to do customer research. And I love that you're doing that. And I think the theme here is you've actually turned that into a KPI for your reports and the product management division at your company, which says that it's important to develop that habit. So I would totally champion that.
It's not where I would like it to be. I can tell you where I would love it to be. I think since you're opening this, I would tell you what could be ideal, but it's a lot to ask for. So I'm not implementing that right now. But so I do check that people, interact with customers and they have written down notes, right? And written down notes should not be like 2 lines. It should be telling something. Ideally, somebody can transcribe what the meeting was, but that's almost impossible. I try, but it's very, very difficult. But what I would have loved to do that we don't do right now, because it's a lot to ask for, but I would love to have people repeat in their head and in their notes the meeting and try and extract problem statements. In the past, I've implemented that in some situations. It was successful, but you have to do it in a continuous fashion over a long time. And then you see those problem statements. How many references do you have to every problem statement? It's really giving you a really great visibility into what's going on. Now, asking that is difficult, as I said, but having clear notes is a good start.
I might also just tack on to that. Another thing you can do is it can be very hard to listen attentively and to draft notes. So I often, when I'm facilitating research sessions, with a client is you'll have one person facilitating and one person taking notes, and then you kind of debrief at the end. Sometimes it does mean it's a 2-on-1 instead of a 1-on-1, and it doesn't need to be perfect. You can get better at this over time, but that's one way to get a little bit higher quality data. And you can also just use something like an audio recorder on your phone instead of handwriting the notes. Is just, when that meeting's over, you grab a phone booth type room and just talk into a phone, and then you can just have that text, converted, have the audio converted to text very simply and quickly with a machine. And then that way you've got a nice dump of what the conclusions were from the session. So the one thing to watch out for sometimes is just that building these libraries of content. A lot of times, and this was traditionally in like the usability field and the human factors field, they came out of science backgrounds. So they would write these very long reports. And typically what happens is, guess what? Nobody reads the reports. So you have to watch out for that. We're doing all this stuff, but we're not taking any action on the information there. So I like the highlight reel concept, however you go about doing that. So, but that's great. So I wanted to move on to, can you talk to me a little bit about like engagement with these data products? So one of the things that I know, and this is probably a little bit truer in companies that are deploying internal analytics, like non-digital native companies, non-product companies, but they're having trouble with engagement. So customers aren't using the services. Do you have any broad ideas on how we can increase engagement from your perspective? How do you make the tools more useful, more usable? What do you have to say about that?
How do you make the tools more useful? I think it's also, it's kind of a somewhat related question to how do you make your product successful to begin with. I'm going to talk about a new concept rather than incremental. If you're doing something incremental, I'm assuming you have enough data to kind of place your bets successfully. But if you're doing a fairly new concept, what I would usually recommend is don't code it. Try and use simulations and Exceling and modeling and whatever it is that you can to build it without building it, to prototype it. And then have a few lead users. Those are users that are excited about this domain and they really care about solving that specific issue enough to work with you iteratively. And then you need like 2, 3 or 4 of those, and you just start working with them. And as much as possible, use their data. So in the data domain, right, when we're doing analytics related products, part of the user experience is the entire cycle. It's not just, the user interface is the user experience. No, it's how the data is being, getting into the system. How is it being acquired? How is it being processed? And how is it being used on the other side when it's producing meaningful insights? And so you can test a lot of that cycle without a product and or with a very light, sort of a prototype of the product. And I'd recommend that as much as possible. And if you're going the right way, you will know very quickly. And if you're going the wrong way, also you will know quickly, and you can either course correct or eliminate completely the project and save a lot of time and money, right? So that's usually something that works really, really well for new concept. Now, for incremental, it's slightly different. Usually you can use a similar type of approach, but you can code something that's kind of a prototype into your product and show capability. And then usually you would have a lot more customers that are willing to work with you because it's a small increment. And then, so, you can validate early. That, I guess, that's the bottom line here. Experiment, iterate, validate early.
You're listening to Experiencing Data, the podcast that explores how design and user experience make enterprise data products and analytics applications more useful, usable, and valuable. Your host is Brian O'Neill of Designing for Analytics, designer, UX consultant, and advisor to the business leaders behind custom enterprise data products and analytics applications. For more information, visit designingforanalytics.com. If you're enjoying the show, help Brian out by rating it on iTunes. And now, back to Brian.
How is it necessary to code, even, I'm going to use the word code, we're talking about Excel or whatever it may be, and is it necessary to get even into that level of technical implementation in order to do a prototype? I love the idea of working with customer data, right? Because that removes some of the classic example I've experienced is like financial products, right? Where I was working on a trading system, portfolio management, and you'd have a bunch of stock positions in a table, and you're trying to test the design of the table, and you have funny prices for why is Apple stock trading at $12? Oh my God, what is going on? And that has nothing to do with the study, but you've now completely taken the user out of the
mode. You will not get a meaningful response from that person.
So I love that, but do you need to necessarily even get into modeling and all this kind of stuff? If, for example, the goal is to see, would that downstream user take action or not based on what they're seeing, in the tool, if you're using a paper prototype or something like that? Like, what would you do if it says it's predicted to be between 41 and 44? What would you do next? And you happen to know that that's like a sensitive range. Do you even need to have actual Excel or math happening behind the scenes?
I can see where this question kind of is coming from. In many cases, just putting like a wireframe mockup might really give people a good feeling about where you're going with this. But I do think that in many, many cases, not working with real data and even customer data is not a must, but real data is not going to give you the right answer. And I'll explain when this can happen. So there is the case that you mentioned, which I wasn't even about to mention that, but it's true. It's like if the data that you see doesn't make sense, you're emotionally detached, right? So you're not getting good responses from this person. Now, assuming the data, is good, and if it's yours, you're even connected much better to what you see. But certain type of problems are just, you cannot understand, you cannot get a meaningful answer if the data is not real. I'll give an example. Right now, we're facing a very specific situation where LogicMonitor is actually now in the process of redoing the UI and fixing usability. I'm told that this is the 4th time we're doing it. And there is a very specific problem of how to do search. And the search, we've been going back and forth on how does the search results should really show up, because there's the search results are coming back in multiple levels. There's data with dependency, and results are coming from multiple levels of dependency and need to show up on the same screen in a way that the user can use it. And we kind of got to the conclusion that this is the problem is hard enough to answer, and we need to prototype like maybe 1 or even 2 or 3 types of result presentation and just show it to customers. And obviously, we want to code as minimum as possible to do that, but this is something we're going to do. And then we usually do it with just wireframes, but in that specific situation, we are not only needing real data, but we're actually coding something very minimal 3 times to get the right answer.
I think the theme here is whether it's code or whatever material you're using, there's a theme of prototyping. And I would add that, in the spirit of a minimum viable product, or what I would call a minimum valuable product, I like that better, is figuring out what is the minimum amount of design work. And I mean design, which could include some technical implementation like a prototype. What's the minimum amount that you need to put out in front of a customer to learn something, to figure it out if it's on the right track? That's really what it's about. So if in your case, maybe it does take, actually building a light prototype, maybe you don't actually query 30 data sources and you just have one database with a bunch of seed data in it, and you kind of control the test, but at least it simulates the experience of, pulling data from many places or something like that. And then you can tweak the UI as you evaluate.
Yeah, I think it's a bit domain specific. I think that, again, because in many cases you can do wireframes and you'd be fine. But remember, the products that have if you're trying to test a complete flow, right? You're testing a flow which may include 10, 15 steps of the user through the user interface. And if you can do that with just wireframes, where every step that they did produces a result that kind of makes sense, and you don't have to model it at the background, then that's fine. It's probably better. But when we are talking about 10 to 15 steps, sometimes the amount of effort that goes into the wireframe is big enough to consider a very light background Excel implementation, when it becomes kind of comparable, if doing wireframe is 80% of doing a very light implementation where the background is Excel, or even 70%, then I would say, hey, let's do a little bit more of an effort, and then our ability to test opens up to a lot of other possibilities that are not rigid within that wireframe, right? So something to think about.
Sure. And I would agree, if you can get a higher fidelity prototype like that with the same amount of effort, then absolutely you're gonna uncover probably exceptions, or you're gonna uncover information in an evaluation with a customer that you didn't probably ask about. There's so much more stuff going on. There's so much more information to be gleaned from that. So the main thing is not falling in love with it too early and not over investing in it such that you're not willing to really make a change to it going forward. And I find that's the challenge especially with data products, is there's such, there's often, as I'm sure you've experienced, there's a tremendous amount of investment sometimes just to get to the point where there's a search box and there's data coming back. And at that point, you can fool yourself and say, oh, we're doing design iterations. But in reality, no one really wants to go back and change the plumbing at that point because it was so hard just to get to that first thing. So I think the goal is to not build too much and be aware of that bias to not want to go back and rework what may be a difficult, it's just a search box. It's like, yes, but if no one can get from A to B, then the entire value of the product it's moot. And it sounds like it's just a search box. It's like, well, there's a lot of stuff going on with getting them from A to B in the right way in that particular case. So
I totally agree. I've seen a lot of managers do that mistake. I bet that I did that mistake once or twice in my career. This is awesome. It looks great. Package it and let's ship it. That is a big mistake, because then people are telling you, no, this is just a proof of concept. And managers sometimes cannot understand the difference. And so it's a communication problem. It's setting expectations. And you're right. Sometimes the way to avoid it is just not get into this rat hole. And I agree if you can.
So traditionally, from my work in the domain that you're in, the tradition of enterprise tools is that, quite frankly, they can suck. And the tolerances for quality was quite low. And I think that's been changing. It's a slow growth, that the expectation that these tools can kind of be hard to use and they're supposed to be really complicated, and they're for this very technical user. That's changing. Like the customer, the end user, is more aware of design. So I'm curious, do you find that expectation is going up? And do you find that new technology is making it easier to provide a better experience? Or is that being negated by the fact that, like, in your particular domain, you've got cloud and on-premise, and I could see the challenges going up just as well as some of the tools might get better. The challenges might get harder too. So is it kind of like net out at like no change, or like, what are your thoughts on that?
No, it's not. It's not the opposite vectors. They're actually pointing to the same direction.
Okay.
I think, right? So the thing is, what you're saying is, I believe, no longer the case. I don't know, maybe in some old banks somewhere in Europe where like old fashioned, because I still heard that some banks in Germany are based on paper. So that's why I made this comment, but no computers. But no, this is in my mind, this is long gone. It's multiple trends are really pointing to the same direction. First of all, people are educated by Apple that you can, in fact, have a product that's pleasant to use. Some people, like young people in their 20s and 30s, most of what they've seen is really a lot better than what you and I have seen, being slightly older than that. And so expectation is to have good products, and they've seen that hardware and software and combination of those things can be done well. That's one. The second is that the technology is evolving, especially in my space. There's been virtualization, and then there's cloud, and then there's containerization, and so many heavy, big waves that are changing everything, that you constantly have to refresh your software. And the ability, so the users inside the enterprises are now replacing stuff much faster. They're replacing their infrastructure much faster. And then with that, they replace software and adopt it much faster. So the barrier of replacing software goes down. And so bad software will go out and better software will come in, right? So if it's easier to use, you will actually win in the marketplace because of that. It's it's not a secondary. It's one of the things that people care about, and they don't care about the user experience specifically. They care about being able to complete their tasks. They don't care how that happened. So if it was easier to achieve what they need, and it left them with a good feeling, it's a better tool. That derives better usability, and so everything is pointing to the same direction because you have to refresh as a vendor. You have to create software faster to adjust to the new waves of technology that's coming in, because that's part of being competitive. And while you're at it, you have to take care of creating really strong usability, because then you will have another advantage in the marketplace. So I think those trends are all reinforcing the same direction. You have to have great usability. And by the way, usability is not limited to user interface. It's everything. User interface is just a part of it.
I didn't want to bias my question to you, but I would wholeheartedly agree that the tolerance levels for, really difficult software or software that doesn't really provide the value clearly or quickly, the tolerances for that have gone down quite a bit. And I think you're totally spot on that consumer products have created an expectation that it doesn't need to be that complicated. A lot of times this is surfaced in language like, oh, it's kind of ugly, or customers will comment sometimes on the paint and the surface interface because they don't necessarily have the language to explain why it actually may be a utility problem or just a value problem. So I think the importance here is, as you said, usability is important, but it's not just about that. Ultimately, it's about whether value is created. So if you're a decision support tool, like a declarative decision support tool in your case, it's probably often about minimal time spent using the tool, maximum signal when I do have to use the tool. And like the best case scenario is probably never needing to go into the tool to begin with. That's actually the highest business value. And so you could focus all day on UI, but maybe it's a one sentence text message is really the only interface that's required, and you might deliver a ton of value with just that. So I would totally agree with you.
So I agree. I'll to add on what you have said, I totally agree. I actually see it in the marketplace. Actually, LogicMonitor is winning deals that are based on ultimately better usability. I can give you an example. So a lot of customers that we see, kind of companies are growing and they start monitoring using a few kind of open source tools. And there's so many of them. And when you're small, you're like, this is awesome. I'm going to use this open source tool and I have the problem solved. And then the company grows. And at some point, the open source tool, you realize that you spend so much time maintaining it and so much time on making sure that the tool keeps on working when you add another resource to the network. I think the old expression was tool time versus value time or something like that. And that's why I said it's not about...
Yeah, tool time versus goal time.
Goal time, exactly. And so this is much, much bigger than user interface. This is about the whole experience, which means that in those open source tools, you need to have a team of 5 people that are chasing all the changes that happen in the organization. And you're never there. You're never actually up to date with what's going on. And so from a very high level perspective, this thing just doesn't work. And it doesn't work because of usability. And so we come in and I've stated what we're trying to do. We're trying to do something that just works and works well and quickly. And you're able to deploy it quickly and it automatically discovers the changes and follows what's going on. And people are like amazed by that. And it's part of the rationale of, depending on the problems that they have. But in many cases, it's part of what makes them buy our product. And at the same time, part of our product had older user interface. And I think that the comment that you've said before, where you said, oh, it's kind of an ugly UI or something, I think there are situations where products, even that are a bit older, might have pieces of user interface that are not as great, but the overall experience is so good that it carries the product forward, right? So, and that's why sometimes you would see, I think that in organizations that have a choice, they might actually opt for a product that on a first glance might look not as great from UI perspective, but overall experience is good. I'm not saying that this was the situation with LogicMonitor because we actually have pretty good UI as well. But I think that our UI reached a point where it needs to be, improved, and that's what we're doing now.
Can I ask you a question on that? Just as we get towards the end here, what were the objectives for your, if you're able to share, like what are the outcomes that you want to get from the new UI? There's some business or customer impact you're probably looking for, right? A business justification for the redesign.
There is. It's fairly complicated because it's also a very expensive process. There are very qualitative things that you start hearing, like, oh, your user interface looks old. Or people tell you things like your customer X is much easier to do a certain task. So I like that better because it's a lot more specific and they can explain why and all that. But in many cases, you just get like, oh, this other company has like a new UI and it's so much more pretty and cool. And that's very hard to measure and very hard to act on. So we had some of that. But more specifically, I think that LogicMonitor is also moving from kind of the mid-market to more and more enterprise. And as that happens, certain things that used to be okay are no longer okay. So the amount of data that we're dealing with on the screen and how we present it and how we process and present it, when you have a couple of hundreds of items, you can think about a tree or a table. When you have hundreds of thousands, then the entire thinking process is different and you need a complete different method. So there's been all those changes like trends that we're moving up market in terms of size. We expect a lot more data in the user interface. People are telling us that the UI looks a little bit old. We want to refresh also the technology so we can do other things. Like if you're doing things that are mostly server-based, then UI tends to be more static. It doesn't have to be that way, but it's just an engineering challenge. But if you're moving to more new frameworks like React, Redux, or things like that, you can do a lot more dynamic. Every component can take care of itself and its data and its model and update asynchronously. So it opens up the product to do things that are a lot more responsive, like a one-page application, for example. Large part of the light business logic is actually done on the client side rather than the server side. And so it makes a much better user experience. So there's been all those multiple causes, multiple trends that lead us to the conclusion that we need to refresh.
Was there a particular business outcome though? Are you having some attrition and you're looking to stop that? Or do you think this is the way to like start facilitating sales to close more easily with the better UI or anything like that? Or is it mostly qualitative?
No, it's we believe that some of the, we try and quantitatively justify stuff. So we look at all the requests from the last 2 years and how many of them are related to UI and certain things in the UI that are very hard to do today. We do think that this will encourage sales for certain reasons that we will improve in the UI. I think that over the years, the product also, because there's so many people changing things in the product, I think that some of the consistency have dissolved along the way. So in most cases, you do things the same way, but in other cases, you do it a little bit differently. And that is both in concepts and the UI. And that's confusing for new users. Old users don't care. They got used to it. But I think there's some issues of consistency. But back to your question, we do expect that to increase sales. We expect that to increase customer satisfaction. And we're actually improving a lot of the flows that we went through. And we realized that simple things are missing in the UI that can, those are the nuggets, the gold nuggets that you find on the way is the really simple things that you could add in or modify in certain places that would make flows a lot better. And I mean, reducing 5 to 10 clicks in a certain flow. My favorite one is, I look at the user and he ends up working on a product and they have like 6 or 7 open tabs. I'm like, why do you have so many tabs? And he explains, It makes total sense, and it shows that you're missing something in the product. Like there's a couple of things that are easy telltales. If multiple tabs open, or you have a sticky note on the side with text, or you have an Excel open on the side where people copy paste, all those things are signs to problems with your product. We had a few of those, and our product is going to come out the other side much, much more pleasant for the users and help them achieve things faster.
Great. Well, I wish you good fortune and good luck with that redesign that you guys are going through at LogicMonitor. So on that note, where can people find LogicMonitor, and where can they find you if they wanted to follow your...
You can find me on Twitter. The handle is at Gadi Oren, Gadioren. I have a LinkedIn page. You can look me up and find me there. LogicMonitor is, you can get to our website. It's www.logicmonitor.com, and that will get you started if you're interested with that.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Gadi. This has been really fun to talk to you and hear about your experience here. So thanks for coming on Experiencing Data.
Great. Thank you very much for having me.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Experiencing Data with Brian O'Neill. If you did enjoy it, please consider sharing it with the hashtag #ExperiencingData. To get future podcast updates or to subscribe to Brian's mailing list, where he shares his insights on designing valuable enterprise data products and applications, visit designingforanalytics.com/podcast.